My name is Abigail Sassano, and I'm the owner of the Heart Program. The purpose of the Heart Program is to end violence in all forms through a paradigm shift. This is part 3 of the series, The Price of Freedom, and it's called The Delicateness and Strength of Human Connection. I was planning to talk next about what trust really is, and then I realized that I couldn't talk about trust until I talked about connection. And I couldn't talk about connection until I talked about what gets in the way of connection. So I'm going to be talking about some of the ideas I presented in part 2, what responsibility really is. And that's going to take me right into what gets in the way of connection, which is our misconceptions about fear. I'm going to talk a little bit about narcissism, and that's going to take me right into the strength of connection, which is basically just how fundamental it is to our well-being. So in part 2, what responsibility really is, I talked about how what it is right there in the word. It's the ability to have a response. And that means that we're close enough to something to be touched by it and touch it. It means that we are aware and present, and it means that we have the skill to be able to have a response and not a reaction. And responsibility, the ability to have a response, is something that's innate to all of us. It can get interrupted by things that happen to us. It can get dulled, but it's always there and it always can recover. The other part of responsibility that came to me this week is that responsibility is not something that one person can do by themselves. Responsibility is not a solo activity, because the other thing that's required is to have, if you're going to have a response, there has to be something to respond to. So earlier this week, I was talking to someone and they let me know that I had made them feel bad with the question that I asked. And it was presented to me as, well, I'm really sensitive to that. And so I had something to respond to, right? I had feedback and I had this person that, was feeling bad and embarrassed and it's like, what are they feeling? What is this like for them? So I had that to respond to, and I also had things happening inside of me that I needed to respond to also, because I felt sad because I was like, oh, I forgot this person's sensitive to that, and I also felt scared. And the reason why I felt scared is because we live in a world where a lot of times people's sensitivities are targeted, and people say things and ask questions, kind of targeting people's insecurities in order to kind of gain advantage over them and gain like a dominant position over them. And that's not where I was coming from. And I was afraid that I would be interpreted that way. And I wasn't, and this person just really appreciated me apologizing. And it's like in that moment, no one was required. No, there was no requirement for anybody to be different than what they were, and there was no perception of anyone as different than what they were. So part of being responsible has to do with the way that we respond to fear. And there's a lot of misconceptions about fear. A lot of people think that fear or being afraid is a weakness. A lot of people think that it's like negativity, like it's a negative emotion, is something I hear described a lot. Or that it's kind of like a lack of faith or lack of trust. And I see fear as um, a real substance that has value. Um, it's a real chemical that um, courses through our body, makes changes in the way that our body functions, in the way our brain functions, in the when it's active in our system. And it's really, really important because it alerts us to the presence of threat and risk. Um, and we need that because if we're unaware of risk, then we're not doing anything to mitigate it. And we're not doing anything to protect ourselves from threat. And um, you might ask, well, what was the threat in that moment? And I think it's important to understand that the vast majority of threats that we experience in modern life are not threats to our physical threats to our safety, um, but there's risk to our connection to other people, um, which is really, really important. Looking in the context of like ancient history, where being banished from the tribe meant death, pretty much. Um, but also how much our well-being is dependent on being connected to other people. Um, we need those connections to survive and to be healthy. Um, so I think a lot of the negative views about fear come from the habitual and instinctive ways that we react to fear. And the three instinctive and habitual ways that we react to fear are um, fight, flight, and freeze. So we fight, we run away, or we just are frozen. And those are responses that happen instinctively. We don't have to think about it. We don't have to make it happen. It just kind of goes on autopilot. And especially when those things are not happening physically, like we're not physically running away, we're not physically fighting. A lot of times we're unaware of it because there's a lot of ways to fight without physically fighting. Um, and looking at the big picture, those three reactions um, will make things worse, and probably will actually like make the threat that we're facing happen even faster, right? So like if I would have gone into an instinctive reaction and I started fighting with her, right, that probably would have um, uh, made us more disconnected. If she would have started fighting with me, that would have made us more disconnected. Um, so if we can cultivate a response to fear, which first of all requires awareness of fear. Are we aware of when we get afraid? What are the cues that tell us where we've become afraid? And to keep our mind and our heart engaged in the process. And then we can really take a look at, what's at risk here? What do I stand to lose? What do I stand to lose that's important to me? And where's the threat actually coming from? And that's the problem with the with the instinctive um, reaction of fighting, right? We just lash out, and it's like it's indiscriminate. So it's not even like specific to like where the threat's coming from. So we have to know where the threat's coming from. And a lot of times we make the miscalculation that the threat is coming from the other person. Um, it's like I got scared and you're here, so you must be threatening me in some way. Not realizing that, like in this particular example, the threat wasn't coming from me. The threat wasn't coming from this other person. The threat was coming from um, misinterpretation. Um, and the only way to protect ourselves from misinterpretation is to stay present, to stay calm and balanced, and give information that clarifies. Um, I'm not doing this on purpose. And I didn't do that on purpose. Um, so the risk that I perceived was my connection to this person. It was in danger. It was in danger. And it was in danger from misperception. Because if I'm being perceived in a way that's different from the way that I really am, then connection isn't happening. And that's going to take me into what I want to say about narcissism. So, first, I'm going to explain briefly about why I don't use the word narcissist. Um, I do think narcissism is a real phenomenon and a real dynamics that um, is really important to understand. Um, However, I don't use the word narcissist. Um, as a licensed therapist, I have diagnosed people with narcissistic personality disorder um, within the context of written informed consent to be diagnosed, to be evaluated and diagnosed. Um, and so outside of that context, it's actually um, unethical for me to refer to someone as a narcissist. And even with people that I have diagnosed with narcissist personality disorder, um, within the context of informed consent to be evaluated and diagnosed, I would, refer to the person as like a person with narcissistic personality disorder. And so, um, I do think the topic and the conversation is important. And sometimes when I hear people talk about narcissist or referring to someone as narcissist, I get a little worried because I think that sometimes using that term has a tendency to allow us to dismiss someone completely as a human being. Um, and also to kind of see them as lacking the capacity to grow. That, this is a finite state or stage for them. Um, at the same time, when I hear people using those words, I do know what they're talking about. And um, there are a lot of people whose their capacity for responsibility and their capacity to be responsible is still there, but it has been stunted, and they're not using their capacity to be responsible. And one of the ways that this shows up is that people that are not um, being responsible, they're not responding to themselves. And so they're not aware of what's happening inside them. And so if you interact with them, they're going to be projecting onto you whatever is happening with them. And if you're not aware of what's happening and not seeing them clearly and seeing their trouble with responsibility clearly, um, it's going to be really confusing. And you're going to feel really terrible and you're not going to know why. And one of the reasons why it feels really terrible to interact with someone that isn't being responsible is because um, since they're not responding to what's happening inside of them and they're projecting it onto you, um, and then anything you present to them as like what's going on with you, they're just not gonna be able to see it. And the question is, how does someone get to that point? And what I see is that um, people that aren't responsible haven't had a lot of accurate mirroring in their life. They haven't had a lot of people show them accurately who they are. Um, and part of it is because they're not showing who they are. So um, it makes it hard to give an accurate reflection to someone that's not responsible because they're not showing you anything to reflect back to them. Um, and so their capacity is stunted. And your ability to relate to them in a way that's healthy is blocked by that. Um, and that takes me to the strength of connection, because our need to be mirrored accurately, to be seen the way that we are, um, is something that doesn't ever go away. And it's something that um, can't be filled with any other means. Um, it's like if you drink lots and lots and lots and lots of water, like that'll satisfy your thirst, but at least in the long term, it won't satisfy your hunger. Um, and to be seen accurately and to see another person accurately, and for that to happen at the same time, that is connection. And it's a little bit tough because we live in a world where that's happening very infrequently. And there's a lot of things that people are doing to um, compensate for that and to kind of um, ease the pain of not having that need met. And, that's everything from, addiction, substance use, um, violence, um, materialism, all the ways that people have of trying to fill something and trying to meet a need that can only be met in that way. It can only be met by what is needed. Um, being seen and seeing at the same time. And that is the strength of human connection.